everyone, welcome back to my channel for a brand new mystery with Molly, and happy new year. This is the first true crime video I'm going to be posting in 2020. I hope you all had a good Christmas and New Year, and if you don't celebrate Christmas, I hope you just had a nice little break with your family and friends. But it is January now, so I hope you're all looking forward to 2020. Can you believe it's 2020? Today we are going to be talking about the Villisca-axe murders, but before we get into the actual case, I just want to let you guys know that this video has been made in partnership with the brand Emma, which is a money management app. Now, one of my New Year's resolutions this year is to just make smarter choices with my money. You know, it's January. January is a hard month when it comes to finances. We've just had Christmas, and I found that using the Emma app has really helped me cut back on unnecessary spending. You can connect all of your bank accounts and credit cards and investments and also your pension to the Emma app so that all of your data is in one place, making it so much easier for you to manage and track your money. You can also get weekly reports on where you are spending your money and how much you are spending, and this feature was such an eye-opener for me. I was so shocked when the Emma app showed me exactly how much I was spending in certain places. Another thing that is really useful about the Emma app is that it gives you a full list of all of your subscriptions and monthly recurring payments, like your bills and fees, etc., across all of your accounts, so that you can see very clearly exactly where your money is going each month. Because you know, sometimes when you check your bank and you're just like, where has my money gone, and you don't realize all of the subscriptions and things that you've signed up to. Well, Emma shows you absolutely everything so that you can, you know, delete a few subscriptions, or just so it makes it a bit more clearer for you to see where your money is actually going. And you can also see how much money you have left until payday. Emma is designed to help you save money, and it is completely free. It's free to download and to use. I highly recommend that you guys check it out. It is available to use for people in the UK, the US and Canada who have Android and iOS devices. And it's also super quick and easy and simple to set up. It literally takes a few minutes. If you want to download Emma, then head to the link in the description of this video. I honestly could not recommend this app enough, and I would not recommend it if it wasn't something that I used myself and that I believed in. Thank you so much to Emma for partnering with me on this video, and now let's talk true crime. So today, like I said, we're going to be talking about the Villisca-axe murders, and this case was actually suggested to me in the comments of my previous video, I believe, my Q&A that I did. Someone suggested this case in the comments of that video, and I had heard of this case, but I didn't know anything about it really, and then I started looking into it, and oh my god, I got so invested. It's such a creepy case, and I just decided there and then I definitely needed to cover this. Quickly, before I get into it, I just want to clarify that my intent with these videos is never to offend or upset anyone that may have been involved with this case. The information that I've collected on this video has been from several different sources online, all of which are linked in the description of this video if you want to do any further reading. And having said all of that, let's just get into today's case. So this case took place in Villisca, which is a city in Montgomery County in southwestern Iowa in the US. And it happened in June of 1912, so it is a very old case. It's well over 100 years old. In fact, I believe this case is probably the oldest case I've ever covered on my channel. At the time, I believe there was a population of about 2,000 people in Villisca, so it was a very quiet place. Not much really went on there. I can't imagine that crime rates were very high at the time. And at the end of a quiet street in Villisca, there was, and still is to this day, an old white house, which at the time in 1912 was the home of the Moore family. Married couple, 43-year-old Josiah Moore, I'm not entirely sure if I'm pronouncing his name right, and his wife, 39-year-old Sarah Montgomery Moore, moved into this house in Villisca in 1899 after they got married. Josiah was a local businessman, and quickly after moving into this house in Villisca, Josiah and Sarah started their family. In total, they had 4 children, and these were 11-year-old Herman, 10-year-old Catherine, although some sources say that she was 9 at the time, but most say 10, so I'm inclined to believe it's 10, as well as 7-year-old Boyd and 5-year-old Paul. The Moore family were regular attendees of their local church, and they were very well liked within their community, and it just seemed as though they had the perfect little family. That was until June the 10th, 1912, when in the night, the entire Moore family would be murdered in their own home. Now, before I get into the actual murders, I just want to tell you a little bit about a few strange things that happened in the days leading up to the murders that could be linked to the murders, but we don't know for sure whether they are or not. So in the early hours of June the 8th, 1912, a local woman named Faye Van Gilder saw a strange man, she described him as strange, hanging around Villisca. And when Faye approached this man, he said that he was looking for the Moore family home. And apparently, just a day before the murders happened, Sarah Moore also saw a strange man hanging around their property, but at the time she didn't really think anything of it. By the way, we don't know if these two men were the same man, and I don't know what they meant when they were describing him as strange. I don't know if they just meant strange in the sense that they hadn't seen him before, or they didn't know him and he wasn't from the local area. I'm not really sure. But it seemed as though a strange man was kind of lurking around the Moore family home in the days leading up to the murders. So it could be linked to the murders or might not be. Now, the Moore family weren't the only people who were staying in the house that night, the night of the murders. On the evening of the 9th of June 1912, so the evening before the murders, the Moore family attended a children's service at their local church, which Sarah Moore was actually co-director of. Also at the service with the Moore family that night were Catherine Moore's friends, 12-year-old Lena Stillinger and her 8-year-old sister Ina Stillinger. And 10-year-old Catherine Moore had asked Lena and Ina if they wanted to stay around at her house that night for a kind of sleepover, and they asked their older sister Blanche if that was okay, and Blanche said that it was. And so at 9:30 p.m. that night, the Moore family and the Stillinger sisters walked back home, which was about 3 blocks away from the church, I believe. Once they got back home, they had some milk and cookies as a late night snack, and then they all went to bed. The following morning at 5 a.m, Mary Peckham, who was the Moore family's next door neighbour, woke up and she began putting out her laundry in her yard. And around 2 hours later at 7 a.m, Mary noticed that she hadn't seen any of the Moore family, which was really odd because at this point, normally on a normal day, they would be up and doing their chores by this time, but she hadn't seen any of them, which she thought was really unusual. But as well as that, Mary said that it just seemed too quiet. It seemed like the house was too quiet and still and calm. You know, this was a house with 4 kids in. It wasn't normally like this. And so Mary, thinking that this was really strange, approached the Moore family home and she knocked on the door, but there was no answer. So she tried to open the door, but it was locked. And so at this point, Mary decided to contact Josiah Moore's brother, Ross, and tell him about the situation because she was getting really concerned about the Moore family, and Ross came down to the Moore house straight away. Ross actually had his own key to the house, and so once he got there, he unlocked the door and went inside. Once he was inside of the property, Ross went into the downstairs bedrooms and discovered the bodies of 12-year-old Lena Stillinger and 8-year-old Ina Stillinger, who had been invited over for a sleepover the night before. Ross also saw just blood everywhere, all over the bed sheets, all over the bedstead, and so immediately he went straight back outside. He didn't look around the rest of the house. He went straight back outside and told Mary Peckham to go and get the sheriff. Quickly, City Marshal Hank Horton arrived at the scene, followed by Sheriff Orrin Jackson, and they began walking around the house where they found the dead bodies of all of the Moore family. Every single person who had been staying in the house that night had been brutally murdered. The house guests, Lena and Ina Stillinger, were obviously found in the downstairs bedrooms, but the Moore family, the members of the Moore family, including the children, were all found upstairs. And when the City Marshal Hank Horton came out of the house, house, he told Ross Moore that there was somebody murdered in every bed. News of the murders travelled fast around the local area, and quickly the scene of the crime was just crowded with members of the public just wanting to know what had happened. And according to some sources online, the day after the murders, when the bodies had just been discovered, at least 100 people were just allowed to go into the house and walk around and look at these dead bodies in their beds, which of course would have just corrupted the entire crime scene. Obviously back then they wouldn't have been able to get any kind of forensic evidence anyway in 1912. But in terms of other evidence, like physical evidence, that would have just all been corrupted if people were just allowed to walk around the house and the crime scene. Honestly, that is one of the most frustrating parts about this case, the fact that at least 100 people were just allowed to go into the house and look at these dead bodies and corrupt the crime scene. I don't know why they were allowed to do that. Eventually the crime scene was closed off and the police began trying to work out what happened to these people that night in 1912. So it was estimated that the killer or killers had began their attack sometime after midnight. It was also found that they had made themselves at home in the family barn, because it seemed as though they were sitting on the hay bales in the barn and watching the home through a knot hole before the attack. So they were literally watching the Moore family before they attacked them. There were also 2 cigarette butts found in the attic of the family home, and the police believe that the attacker may have been staying in the attic as well before the murders. So the killer actually used an axe to kill his victims, and he used the blunt end of the axe and not the actual axe part. He actually used the blunt end to beat them to death. And what's interesting about this axe is that it didn't actually belong to the killer. It actually belonged to Josiah Moore, and the killer had taken it from the Moore's coal shed and then entered the property through an unlocked back door. And I just find that fact so strange, because he obviously came to the Moore's house with the intention of killing everyone inside of it, but he didn't actually come armed. He took the weapon out of the coal shed. And to me, that suggests that whoever killed the Moore family must have known them, because how would he know that Josiah Moore owned an axe and that it was kept in their coal shed? I just find that so strange. Why would the killer come to the house with the intention of killing without a weapon, unless he knew where a weapon was kept? So once the killer got inside the house, the police believe that he went straight upstairs to Josiah and Sarah's bedroom and he killed them first. The killer used an axe to murder them, like I just said, and he actually swung the axe so far above his head that it gouged and made dents in the ceiling above. Josiah Moore had been hit with the axe the most out of anyone else. I believe he was struck roughly 30 times to the point where he was literally unrecognisable. Although so was his wife Sarah Moore. She had been severely beaten with the blunt end of the axe, and this actually crushed her skull. A kerosene lamp was found at the foot of their bed, and the killer had actually bent the wick back so that it wouldn't create too much light. The lamp was obviously what the killer had been using to see around the house, because it was of course pitch black. It was the middle of the night, but he bent the wick back, like I said, so that it wasn't too bright and so it wouldn't wake people up. And none of the children did wake up whilst Josiah and Sarah were being killed, because they were attacked whilst they were asleep, and so they didn't have a chance to scream or make any noise. After murdering Josiah and Sarah Moore, the killer made his way into their children's bedrooms and he killed all 4 of their children, just beating them to death with the blunt end of the axe. And once again, he made dents in the ceiling where he had been swinging the axe so high. He then made his way downstairs and killed 12-year-old Lena Stillinger and her 8-year-old sister Ina Stillinger. Now, authorities believe that Lena Stillinger could have woken up before she was attacked and tried to fight for her life, because she actually had what looked like a defense wound on her arm, and because of the way her arms and legs were positioned, it looked as though she was trying to get up and move. And they also initially believed that 12-year-old Lena may have been sexually assaulted by the killer, because her nightgown had actually been pulled up and her underwear removed. However, eventually they determined that there was no sign of sexual assault. There was also speculation that a neighbour actually heard Lena's cries during the attack. This neighbour was Edward Lander, and he was visiting his mother nearby that night, and he said that sometime after midnight he heard what sounded like a shout or the sound of a girl moaning, but at the time he didn't really think much of it, and so he just ignored it. But in hindsight, that could have been the sound of Lena being murdered. We don't know. After all of the people in the house were dead, the attacker then returned upstairs and he just further beat every single family member even more with the axe, to the point where they were all unrecognisable. And that to me just suggests that this was a personal attack. It was so vicious that even after he had killed all of these people, he still wanted to do more damage to their bodies, almost like he was taking his anger out on their corpses. After this, he covered each of the bodies with like bed sheets and clothing that he could find around the house. And he also covered the windows and mirrors in the house, which I find really strange. I get covering the windows because he wouldn't want people to see in the house, but I don't understand why he covered the mirrors as well. I just find that really strange. He also attempted to clean and wipe the axe that he used to kill the victims with, but he ultimately gave up with this and he left it in the downstairs bedrooms where Lena and Ina Stillinger's bodies were. This next part is again very weird. I have no idea why the killer did this, but after the murders he actually took a 2-pound slab of uncooked bacon from the icebox and he wrapped it in a towel and placed it in the downstairs bedroom near the axe, and also near this little piece of keychain that was on the floor. I don't know if that keychain belonged to the killer or if it was something that the Moore family owned, but yeah, I found that part really strange as well. No one has any clue why he did this with this bacon, wrapped it in a towel and put it in the downstairs bedroom, but he did. Police determined that he also washed his hands in the kitchen basin because they found a bowl of bloody water, and he obviously did this in an attempt to get the blood off of his hands. And he also at some point in the night made himself a plate of food in the kitchen, but eventually he abandoned this plate of food and left the Moore family home sometime before 5 AM. And then after that we know what happens. The next door neighbour, Mary Peckham, wakes up and she alerts the sheriff that dead bodies had been found inside the Moore's family home. Now, when it came to trying to catch the killer, this case was almost doomed from the start because, well, for one, this was 1912. Of course, back then, over 100 years ago, they did not have the forensic technology that we have today. It's more than likely that if this case happened today, the police would be able to catch the killer pretty quickly because of the technology that we have now. But also in terms of like physical evidence that the police could have gone on back then, they didn't really have any of that either. Does that make sense? Like, as far as I'm aware, the killer didn't leave anything behind at the scene that could have indicated who he was, apart from that piece of keychain that was found in the downstairs bedroom. But like I said earlier, I'm not sure if that belonged to the killer or if it just belonged to one of the Moore family members. But also, like I mentioned earlier, for some reason the day after the murders, at least 100 people were just allowed to go in the house and walk around and look at the dead bodies and disturb the crime scene before it was eventually closed off. And so even if there was even the smallest piece of evidence for the police to go on, it would have been corrupted because these people were just allowed to walk around the house. But despite this lack of evidence, there were still quite a few suspects in this case, and I'm going to discuss the main ones with you now. The first suspect we're going to talk about was a man named Frank Jones. Frank was an Iowa state senator, and he was a very well-respected member of the community. And Frank actually used to work with Josiah Moore, who was obviously one of the victims in this case. Josiah worked with Frank for around 9 years, I believe, at his Jones store establishment, but eventually Josiah left to start his own business. And after this, Josiah and Frank's relationship was pretty rocky because there was speculation that when Josiah left, he took with him the profitable John Deere franchise. However, I'm not entirely sure how true that is, so take that information with a pinch of salt. But if that is true, it would have meant that Josiah and Frank would have been competitors in business. But as well as that, there were also rumours going around that Josiah had been having an affair with Frank's daughter, and so people theorised that maybe Frank decided to get his revenge and murder Josiah and his entire family. And another suspect who kind of ties in with Frank Jones was a man named William Mansfield. A lot of people believe that Frank Jones hired William Mansfield to physically carry out the murders. So Frank was like the brain behind the plan, behind the murders, but William was the one to physically carry them out and kill the Moore family and the Stillinger sisters. And William Mansfield could have potentially been involved with other murders. In fact, he was believed to be a serial killer responsible for the murders of his wife, child and in-laws, and he could have also been connected to similar axe murders and attacks that happened in Kansas just 4 days before the Villisca-axe murders. And also, according to some sources online, in the Kansas axe murders, the mirrors in the home were also covered. Just like the Villisca-axe murders, the killer had covered all of the mirrors and windows. The killer in the Kansas axe murders had also done the same, and William Mansfield was believed to be responsible for the Kansas axe murders. So that doesn't look good. That looks quite likely that William was also responsible for the Villisca-axe murders because there's just too many similarities. And the police thought the exact same, and so in 1916, William Mansfield faced a grand jury investigation. However, William actually apparently had an alibi for the time of the Villisca-axe murders that put him in Illinois, and so he was released without charge due to lack of evidence. William Mansfield also sued Detective Wilkerson, who was the detective that was investigating him and led the investigation, and he actually won this lawsuit and was awarded $2,225. Another suspect in the case was Reverend George Jacqueline Kelly. George was a travelling preacher, and he eventually settled in Iowa in 1912 with his wife, so the same year as the murders. And apparently on the day of the murders, George was actually travelling through Villisca visiting small communities north of town. And he also attended the same Children's Day church service that the Moore family went to the day before they died, so he was there with them. Police became suspicious of George because he seemed to have some sort of fascination with the case in the days after the murders, and he even went to the lengths of pretending to be a Scotland Yard detective in an attempt to get into the house and look around the crime scene. In 1914, 2 years after the murders, George was arrested for sending obscene material through the mail. Basically, he was sexually harassing this woman who had applied for a job as his secretary, and he became obsessed with this woman and he started sending her obscene letters through the mail, and so he was arrested. As a result of this, he was sent to a psychiatric hospital, and it wasn't till 1917 that he was arrested for the Villisca-axe murders. And at one point he did actually confess to the crime. He said that it was him, but he later took back this statement, and after 2 trials he was acquitted because there just wasn't enough evidence to be able to convict him. Another person of interest in the investigation was a man named Henry Lee Moore, who was also a suspected serial killer. Now, even though they had the same surname, Henry Moore wasn't any relation to the Moore family. He didn't know them, he wasn't related to them or anything like that. But a few months after the Villisca-axe murders, Henry actually murdered his own mother and grandmother, and and he used an axe to murder them. And just like the killer did in the Villisca-axe murders, Henry used the blunt end of the axe to beat his mother and grandmother to death. So he was convicted of this crime for the murder of his mother and his grandmother, and he is also theorized to have been involved with 22 other axe murders before and after the Villisca-axe murders. However, as far as I'm aware, he was never charged with any of those, nor was he charged with the Villisca-axe murders, and in total he served 36 years in prison for the murders of his mother and grandmother. Like I said, he was never charged with the Villisca-axe murders, he was just a suspect in the case. And the final main suspect in this case that I'm going to talk about was a man named Andy Sawyer, or Sora, I'm not really sure how to pronounce his last name, I'm sorry. There wasn't really any evidence at all linking Andy to the crime whatsoever, but it was just his actions in the days after the murders that made him appear suspicious. The morning after the Villisca-axe murders, Andy Sawyer turned up in Creston in Iowa, and he asked a man named Thomas Dyer, who was a pile driver and a bridge foreman, if he could have a job working for him because he desperately needed some work. And Thomas Dyer said yes, and he gave Andy a job on the spot, and the rest of Dyer's crew said that Andy would constantly talk about the Villisca-axe murders. But as well as that, the crew said that at night Andy would go to bed and sleep with an axe. He would hold and cradle an axe in his sleep. Andy Sawyer also told his boss Thomas Dyer that he was in Villisca on the night of the murders, and that's why he fled to Creston and asked for a job, because he was worried that he would be a suspect in the case, and so if he fled to Creston he would have an alibi if he needed one. Obviously Thomas Dyer thought that this was really suspicious, and so he turned Andy Sawyer into the police on the 18th of June 1912. However, due to lack of evidence and an alibi that put him somewhere else at the time of the murders, he was never charged. And those are some of the suspects in this case. There have been several different ones over the years, but I just thought I would talk about the main ones in this video. And to this day, over 100 years later, no one has ever served any time for the Villisca-axe murders, and it remains unsolved. That is the end of the case, but before I end this video, I just want to tell you a little bit about the house where the Villisca-axe murders took place, because a lot of people believe that it is haunted and that paranormal activity goes on there. After the murders, the Villisca-axe murder house was put up for sale, although of course there were no immediate buyers because of what happened there. But eventually, after 3 years in 1915, the house was bought by Mr. J.H. Geisman. Over the years, the Villisca-axe murder house had several different owners, several different people staying in it, although it seemed as though no one really stayed there for long, no one wanted to stay there for long, and it was renovated a lot. Multiple paranormal investigators have visited the house over the years, and most of them, if not all of them, say that they believe paranormal activity does go on there, and that the house is one of the most haunted places in America following the murders in 1912. People really believe that the ghosts or spirits of the axe murder victims are still in that house to this day. In 1994, the house was bought again, and the owners actually stripped it back to its 1912 condition and actually turned it into a tourist attraction. And it is a big tourist attraction. People pay a lot of money to visit there and stay there overnight in an attempt to experience some paranormal activity, which a lot of guests say that they have. Apparently it's rare that people go there and don't experience anything. Like, a lot of the guests say that they did experience something paranormal. Visitors have reported hearing children's voices and also seeing lamps falling over and objects flying around the room and moving ladders. People also do like Ouija boards there, and they take those little EVP recorders. And in 2014, so not that long ago, something really creepy did happen there. Basically, a man named Robert Lawson was staying in the Villisca-axe murder house overnight with a group of friends, and they were doing a paranormal investigation. And at one point in the night, Robert was in the upstairs of the property in one of the bedrooms whilst his friends were all outside of the property, and all of a sudden he called his friends for help. And when they got upstairs, they found that Robert had a stab wound in his chest that appeared to be inexplicably self-inflicted. So Robert was taken to the hospital, and I believe he was eventually fine. But what's weird about this incident is that it actually happened around 12:45 a.m, which was around the same time that the Villisca-axe murders happened all those years ago in 1912. And I couldn't actually find much more information online about that, about the self-inflicted stab wound. But yeah, it's a little bit creepy. And the Villisca-axe murder house is still there to this day. People still do ghost tours there. In fact, I'd be really intrigued to know whether any of you have ever done the tour there, any of my American viewers. Please do let me know if you have, and let me know what your experience was and if you encountered anything paranormal. Obviously, you guys can make your own decision as to whether you think the house is actually haunted or not. That is a very controversial subject. TV crews and like paranormal TV shows have visited the house over the years and made episodes about it. Books have been written, films have been made. There was a film made in 2016 that was based on this case, and it's called The Axe Murders of Villisca. I watched the trailer for it earlier on YouTube and it's really creepy. I haven't actually seen the film, but I watched the trailer. And yeah, that is pretty much it for this case. Please let me know your thoughts on it. Do you think that the killer was someone that the Moore family knew? Do you think the killer was one of the suspects that we talked about earlier, or was it someone else? Do you think that the Villisca-axe murder house is actually haunted or not? Please do let me know. And please let me know if you like this kind of style of video where I discuss true crime and the paranormal a little bit, because I really enjoy discussing like paranormal subjects and ghosts and stuff like that. It's another big interest of mine alongside true crime, and I'd love to incorporate that on my channel a little bit more. Don't worry, true crime isn't going anywhere. I'm still going to be doing true crime all the time. That rhymed. Yeah, I'm still going to be covering true crime cases, but I'm really interested in paranormal and ghost stories and stuff like that as well. So if you would like to see more of that, please do let me know. And if you have any ideas for videos like that, please let me know as well, because I'm not good at coming up with ideas. Once again, thank you so much to Emma for working with me on this video. If you want to download the Emma app, I highly recommend you do, then head to the link in the description of this video. Quickly before I go, I just want to give a special shout out to the members of my Patreon. Thank you so much for your support, guys. If anyone else wants to become a member of our little Patreon family, then the link is always in the description of my videos. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please do give it a thumbs up so that I know you want more of these kind of videos, and subscribe if you haven't already. And I will see you again very soon for another mystery with Mollie. Bye guys.